Hello, good evening, and welcome to the series finale of Bard Around Town. Thank you so much for joining us as we go around the city looking for Shakespeare. My name is Max Forsyth, and I'm the operations coordinator for Bard on the Beach. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and we are honored and grateful to be able to perform and be here. I also like to thank our viewers, our subscribers, our sponsors, and our patrons like you. And I particularly like to thank our sponsors, Lone Tree Cider and Whistler Brewing. Yes, we love our sponsors. Thank you. Now, a few notes of housekeeping before we begin. Please ensure that your cell phone, beeper, and all other electronic devices are turned off, unless, of course, you're watching this video on your cell phone, in which case, leave it on. And if you need to leave the video for any reason, you may do so by pressing the pause button. Thank you. Well, that's all I have for you. So without further ado, please enjoy the season finale of Bard Around Town, Theater History. What a character. Hi, welcome back to Bard Around Town. I'm sitting here in the Arts Club Theater Company's Gold Corp stage, reflecting upon what theater means. To me, it's a reflection of our society. We learn more things about ourselves by watching others perform. I don't know, something like that. On today's episode, we're going to go around Vancouver, and we're going to explore different theater from different communities, as well as the evolution of Shakespeare. How did the Bard go from the opera house to the beach? Care to find out? Let's go. Now, how do we tackle the history of theater? Well, we got to go way back, before settlers arrived with their theater and their Shakespeare. I'm talking about the Coast Salish people who've lived here for thousands of years. They celebrated each other and their community with the Potlatch. The Potlatch was a grand celebratory feast that celebrated multiple different events, including births, weddings, and memorials. Now, when the settlers began to arrive in the 19th century, they wanted to bring their own culture and tradition. So they banned the potlatch of the indigenous communities in 1885. And then in 1951, the ban was lifted. And today, 66 years later, it's still an integral part of many indigenous communities. Now, in the 1800s, when the settlers arrived, they brought Shakespeare to these shores. Let's go explore the Victorian Bard. As a terminus city, Vancouver played an integral part in the British Empire. It linked the West with the Far East, specifically China. When people came through Vancouver, they stayed at the CPR-controlled hotels, like the Vancouver Hotel. And for entertainment, they would go to the CPR-controlled opera, and that's where we'll find the Bard. Behind me is the Duncan Building. This used to be the Imperial Opera House, the second opera house to be built in Vancouver. It was built in 1889, a mere 2 years after the Great Fire of Vancouver destroyed the city. The reason why I'm talking about it is because the very first Shakespeare production, Richard III, was performed here, December 5th, 1889, a mere 100 years before I was born. Now, how was Shakespeare performed in the Opera House? Well, it was performed traditionally. What did this mean? This meant elaborate scenes and set changes, and meant a full symphony orchestra would play between acts. So they actually had to cut down on Shakespeare's dialogue in order to incorporate these huge scene changes. And it was also all about the actors' moment, their soliloquy. Actors became famous for their portrayal of Shakespearean characters. Traditional indeed. In 1911, the Avenue Theatre was constructed, and it served as the primary theatre for the Bard in Vancouver. Many professional theatre companies, such as the Stratford-upon-Avon Players and amateur theatre companies, would perform here. Now, the theatre is located right behind... Oh, yeah, of course it's gone. Nothing lasts forever in this town. No, the theatre was replaced by the substation around the 1920s, 30s. You can notice by its Art Deco facade. Now, when the theatre was here, many people loved to watch the Shakespeare being performed, but it wasn't just people watching. There were also giant rats that frequented the audience, because the theatre was very close to the industrial center of the city, which was False Creek. Patrons also complained about all the toxic smoke and fumes that came from the nearby factories. Now, in the Avenue Theatre, the Bard went through a bit of a transformation. The Shakespeare Society of Vancouver was founded in 1916, and they wanted to bring Bard back to the basics. No more cutting the script. No more elaborate scene changes with huge scenery. No more orchestra. No, they wanted Bard to be simple and performed as it was originally intended to be. Minimal everything, whatever that means. So like all good things, the theatre was torn down. But across the street, a more important cultural institution in Vancouver was also destroyed. A whole neighborhood was gone. Let's go explore what that neighborhood used to be. Now behind me is the Georgia Viaduct, built in the 1950s when the car had become king. Vancouver city planners had a plan for Vancouver. They wanted to build huge, beautiful freeways connecting the suburbs to the city. In order to do so, they had to destroy some neighborhoods, starting with Hogan's Alley. In the first half of the 20th century, Hogan's Alley was the cultural and community center of the black population of Vancouver. Across the street was Vi's Chicken Shack, which many entertainers, such as Nat King Cole and Louis Armstrong, would come to frequent when they were in town. Jimi Hendrix also lived here for a time with his grandmother, who lived here all the time. But all of that culture and history was destroyed to make room for the Viaduct. We lost Hogan's Alley to the Georgia Viaduct, but the city planners weren't stopping there. They wanted to destroy more neighborhoods, particular neighborhoods of immigrants and non-whites. So the citizens of Vancouver said enough is enough, and people from all different backgrounds came together and they stopped the freeways with activism. It was the 60s, man. They saved Strathcona, and they saved this other neighborhood with deep theatrical roots. Let's go. Here we are in Chinatown. Let's go talk about Chinese opera. Chinatown. In the early 20th century, Chinatown was a bustling place, full of Chinese Canadians who just completed building the railroad connecting BC to the rest of Canada. They settled down in this area, which today we call Chinatown, and their theater history dates back to the foundation of this city. Let's go find out what it is. I'm standing here in the Canton Shanghai Alley Complex, which used to house the Chinese operatic theaters in the early 20th century, including the Xingqiu Theater, which had about 500 seats. It was built in 1898, and one was the earliest theater institutions in Vancouver, and it was the epicenter of Chinese Canadians' cultural life. Many of the theaters in Chinatown were supported by local businessmen, including Cheng Choi, the builder of the famous Stampede building, the skinniest building in the world. Clearly, he had a flair for the theatric. Chinese opera, British opera, all of these different Vancouver theater institutions had one thing in common in the early 20th century. They almost suffered a fatal blow. What happened in 1918 that shut down the city and almost killed the theater? We're gonna find out in part 2 of this season finale, Bard Around Town. Thanks for watching part 1 of our 2-parter season finale, Theater History. Please stay tuned and watch the exciting conclusion. I'd like to thank viewers like you for watching this video, as well as our sponsors, Whistler Brewing, for sponsoring us. Please like and subscribe and hit that bell button down there to see more Bard on the Beach content. And look in the description to learn more about the history we've gone over. All right, we'll see you soon for part 2.